Hey, folks, welcome back to this week's episode of Getting In, College Coach Conversation. We're going to open up our office hours at this point in the show, which is something we like to do, especially in the fall, to talk about sort of recurring topics within college admission, college finance, and just to help get some perspective from some of our expert educators on things that students might be thinking about at any given point in the application cycle. And so joining us today, I think maybe you were selected, Jen, by the producer of the show because you were going to disagree with me the most often or the most strongly. I don't know. But it's great to have Jen Simons here on the show. She is a longtime college admission expert, one of our great educators here at College Coach. Hey, Jen, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me, Ian.
So we wanted to talk today about, I think, an area where there is a lot of curiosity on the part of students and families, a lot of maybe consternation on the part of schools and counselors, and that is how many colleges should be on my college list. Maybe this can be a quick segment. Maybe you've got a number that you're thinking of right now, and it's a magic number, and we can just give it and go to break. But what do you think about that question in general?
So the college list should be very different from the college application list. So the number of schools on the list, I mean, it starts off at 50, it gets to 40, 30. I mean, the Common App allows for 20 colleges on the list. That doesn't mean you're going to, on the queue, on the dashboard. That doesn't mean you're going to be applying to 20, and I don't think you should be applying to 20. But that number is going to be different from the one that ultimately, concludes the college application process. I can't predict if you are going to agree or disagree, but I've changed my thinking about this in the past 3 years that I've been with Bright Horizons College Coach. All I care about as an educator is that there are a few colleges on the list, 2, 3. I don't think it should just be one. Ideally, it could just be one, but it's not going to just be one. But let's say you have 2 or 3 colleges that fit the following criteria. I know you can get accepted to the extent that we can know anything. So some level of predictability. Usually this comes with state schools, not necessarily, but some level of predictability. I know you can be accepted. I know your family can afford it. And I know that you would be happy going there, that you'd like to go there. It feels good to you when you say the name of the school, when you visit. I don't care about anything else. I know that sounds weird. Now, there can often be other factors. For example, if your family would like to compare aid packages, be it merit aid or need-based financial aid, you probably should have some more. I'll let my finance colleagues weigh in on that when you speak to them. But at the end of the day, this whole concept of reach schools, I don't even like that term because to me, it implies you're not reaching, you're not aiming high enough if the school that you like is also someplace that can accept you. So I think that if you come to me and say, I want to go to my state university, you've told me, and my high school guidance counselor has told me that it would be an excellent fit for me based on past statistics. People have gotten in with similar GPAs, blah, blah, blah. I'm applying to a major that's not oversubscribed, whatever the case is. I think 1, 2, or 3. But that's probably not what I don't want to stop talking, as you can tell.
Yeah, so you're just going. No, it's fine. I thought you were just going to give me a number, and here you've given me a longer answer. No, I think this is more interesting because there are a few things that you've said that I think are really great for us to pick apart and kind of dive into. I think that it's really important. I want to pick up on the first thing you said. It's got to be more than one, typically, that we're really confident in, that fit into this category, predictable, likely to admit you. And I think the reason for that is you can really like a school, but if you only get into that school and you get denied everywhere else, suddenly that school just psychologically doesn't feel as exciting to you. And so there's always a better feeling when you get to make a choice. If I've got 2 shirts to choose from for the day, I feel like I'm making a choice as opposed to I only have 1 shirt left and everything else is in the laundry. So we want students to be in a position where they get to make a decision at the end of this process. And if you only apply to 1 school where you're really likely to be admitted, even if you really like it, there is a circumstance where you could be denied everywhere except for that one school. And I think that that's just not going to leave you with positive feelings about the outcome, even if the school still is great.
Can I play devil's advocate?
You totally
just because
can.
That's why I'm here. So you've already made that choice. So again, I'm sort of fighting myself by saying you definitely need to apply to more than one school. Mm-hmm. But what about so let's leave it at 3 schools. What if you have 3 schools? Mm-hmm. You're making a choice. You're yes. already saying, this is my choice. This is my decision. I like these schools. I'm going to go ahead and apply. I don't think you should apply to any schools just to apply, any schools that you don't like. So that, and I 100% agree with you. If you get denied by, a lot of schools, and that's frequently what happens when students say, well, and I've had students say this even, this year in the unknowns of COVID and the selectivity getting more selective. I've had students, a mother said, well, if he applies to 20 schools, he has to get in somewhere, right? No, this isn't that. If you play the lottery 200 times, that doesn't mean, I'm not saying that the college is like the lottery, but even I'm not a mathematician by any stretch. And even I know, statistically, that's not how it works. You don't increase your odds.
No, I'm sorry. That's because each school reads your application independently. So the fact that you apply to 20 or 30 or 40 schools doesn't influence how that each of those schools independently make their own decision about your application. When you're in a lottery, if you buy 200 lottery tickets, that is 200 tickets out of whatever the total number of possibilities would be. So you are increasing your chances. But for every given school, applying to more schools doesn't increase your chances of getting into any single one. It's not as though Stanford and MIT and Caltech get together and say, okay, we've got this student who's applied to all 3. So we want to try and improve that student's chances. They're all reading independently. Right. And so there's no way that applying to more schools are going to increase your chances in total, unless you happen to have a higher chance of getting into one of those schools that you've picked. But even that I think is unlikely when we're talking about the most selective schools, which is where this kind of approach tends to pop up most often.
Ian, you're, of course, I said I wasn't a mathematician. You're right. It does increase your odds if you play the lottery 200 times. However, the odds are still so small that it's still so unlikely. This is okay. So I'm creating a new analogy as I go on. And what's interesting is that when I have purchased lottery tickets, 2 things happen. This might be a Jen thing, but I think there are other people that are going to agree with this. I am convinced that I am going to win $800 million or whatever it is. I am convinced that I am going to win it. I tell the person behind the counter, only sell me a good one. I know I'm going to win. But at the same time, I know what the odds are. And I know that chances, I've never won before. I probably am not going to win, but it still feels that way. And I wonder if it doesn't feel that way for kids that are applying to these super duper highly selective schools with this dichotomy of I know that the chances are incredibly small, but I still think I'm going to win. I'm going to be really disappointed, even though I know I'm not going to win when I don't win. Do you know what I mean? And I'm doing what I don't want. And I'll let you talk, I promise, but I'm doing what I don't want you to do. I'm not equating winning the lottery with getting into a selective school. Please, this is totally separate. Okay.
Oh, I know what you're saying. And that sense of confidence. It reminds me of that scene from Dumb and Dumber where he says, 1 out of 100, just more like 1 out of 1,000,000. He's like, there's a chance, And I think that the issue is that it's not about astronomically small chances that are non-zero. I think for most students who are applying to really, really selective schools, the chances are 0. And that's a hard conversation to have. And I think where I get concerned, and coming back to this idea about the scope of the list, is the more schools you apply to, the more work you have to do, the more essays you have to write, the more that you're dividing your attention. Oh, yeah. And so where, I said that these schools are really independent. They're independent in the way that they're making decisions. The fact that you apply to 20 schools doesn't impact your one school. But from a workload standpoint, if you have to divide your attention across 20 schools instead of across 10, that's going to depreciate the quality of your work because you're going to have to be more efficient, which means that you're not tackling each essay with the same level of vigor and commitment and interest. And so maybe you have no chance of getting into Stanford, but writing those 8 essays takes your attention away from that one essay you have to write for BU. And now your BU essay is 80% as good as it could have been instead of 100% as good as it could have been. And now you're hurting your chances at BU because you've given less time to that as you're scrambling to make the deadline.
Oh, absolutely.
So that's one thing that I worry about with this idea of students saying, well, I'm going to apply to a lot of schools and just see what happens, because there is work that's associated with that process.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. And even if there's no extra work, even if it's a Common App situation with no supplements or anything like that, you still need to be doing the work to understand what you like about the school. You still need to be doing the virtual or in-person tours and information sessions. There's no reason to inflate those numbers for your friends. If you're going to think about it that way, like we could go off at a whole thing. I mean, to answer your first question, like in a very simple way, what I usually tell families is like 8, 10. Like if I have to give you a number, that's what I say. So you should have like I'm an even number person. I know that's weird. I can't even imagine applying to an odd number of schools. It makes my, I don't know. It's weird. I'm a weird, whatever. But so 8, 10, if you want to apply to 9 and creep me out, you can. But at the end of the day, like there's no reason to apply to more than that. If you apply sort of well,
yes.
I don't know.
I think you're right. I mean, I work in this, we both work in the admissions profession, and you would assume that in this space, people have a heightened interest in the admission process for individual people. And I've been asked lots of times where I went to college. I've never been asked where else I got in to college. Nobody's ever proactively asked me that. And so a lot of students, I think that there's this moment in your senior year of high school where decisions are coming back and you think about, I'm going to get into 10 schools and I'm going to tell everybody I got into these 10 schools. And you know how long that matters for? Like a month. Yeah. And then after that, you decide where you're going to go. And that becomes the school that you connect with, where you make your friends, where you get your education. And so I think a lot of students hold on to this idea of like, I'm getting into so many institutions. That ultimately doesn't matter. We want to put you in a position where you can get to the right place for you. And ultimately that's going to be one school. And I would suggest that you have a better chance of finding that right one school if your list is shorter, because to your point, researching, understanding, feeling that fit with the school is going to be more likely if you commit to that research process.
Totally. I'll also make an argument, and this is very micro and it's end of the process, but you also probably won't if you're a good kid. And I'm sure the people that are listening the parents that are listening want their kids to be good. You're not going to brag about where you got in because the kid sitting next to you, your best friend, they didn't get into those schools, or you didn't get into those schools, and you don't want them to be like, I got into XYZ. Like this process, it's more emotional than transactional in a lot of ways and at a lot of points in time. And I think at that end point, oh my gosh, it's enormously emotional, so you want to be gentle with your friends.
And that's a thing that like that emotional honesty, I think, is something that I really want to reinforce for kids, because I do think that idea of I'll be happy with this one school, even if I only get in here. I think you can intellectualize that sitting in November, December of your senior year. But when April comes around, if that's the only school where you've gotten an offer, it's going to feel a little bit more crushing than you probably anticipate. And so you just got to be ready for, like, realistically, how am I going to feel about this? And that's hard to predict. So I always have parents know your kids, right? Mm-hmm. Karen Spencer will always say, how many yeses do you need and how many no's can you handle? Which I love. Mm-hmm. And I think that every kid's going to have a different answer to that question. But know thyself when you're putting this plan together.
What about the kids, though, that apply early and they're only getting hopefully one yes and then they're done? Do you think, and I'm asking you this in a genuine way, that they're going to see all those acceptances in April from their peers who didn't apply early or didn't get in somewhere early, and they're like, oh, I should have, Sometimes
I think there can be some buyer's remorse from students who, especially if they're choosing ED for a strategic reason. Right? They say, I want to get into this. I got to increase my chances. So I got to apply ED, as opposed to, this is my favorite school. If I get in here, I don't care what else happens. I'm going for it. I think that's the reason to do it. The strategic reason can leave you in that position in April where you're like, oh, I wish I'd found out if I could have got into some other schools. So you have to think about that. I always ask students when they want to apply ED, Jen, like, How would you feel if you got in everywhere?
Yeah.
Would you still choose this school? And they're like, yeah, this is my favorite. All right, great. Then ED is right for you. But if you want to consider these possibilities, then we have to be a little bit more smart about whether we use that ED option or not.
Sure.
What about, is there, setting aside, let's say that it costs nothing to apply to college, and let's say that there were no supplemental essays. It sounds like you still would place a restriction on how many schools students should choose to apply to.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Oh, if I could start a movement, if I could like get in touch, all right, high school students, listen to me. It will help everyone. The UCAS, the British system, they let you apply to 4 or 5 schools, depending on the major. And I think it's fabulous. There's no reason. I'm guilty, right? Like, what is my job to, well, hopefully it's not my job to perpetuate
it's not your insanity.
Job. It's the opposite, but I'm on the side of it. I certainly was when I worked in admissions, but Ian, there's no reason to apply to so many schools. If you do your research, if you create, COVID aside, not being able to visit, like those are reasons, but you know what? I would love it if high schools, how about that? High school guidance counselors, are you listening? You put a limit for the good of your school. And some schools do this. They say, we don't let our schools apply to more than 8 or whatever. Oh, fabulous. It makes each application so much more valuable to me.
It really does. And it treats the process so much more holistically. And I'll call out, there's a school called Bellarmine Prep, which is in San Jose. And I remember speaking to their counselor, and she just said, we don't sponsor our students to apply to more than 8 colleges. So if they need a letter of recommendation from us, if they need the transcript to be sent, we will say, what are your 8 schools? These are the 8 that we're going to send it. And I think a lot of parents and students might look at that and say, this is unfair. Like, I only get one shot at this. And I think you've just got to reorient your thinking. This is not playing the lottery where you need to buy more tickets. This is about finding that best fit for you. It's more like asking somebody to the dance, right? You don't ask every girl in your grade if they'll go to the dance with you. You find the one person who you most want to go with, who's most likely to say yes, and you find that match, right? So I think it's a little bit, I like that idea of narrowing things down. And it sounds like your focus on these 2 or 3 schools to start with is more about being happy about these options and really thinking about those pragmatically, thoughtfully, and with heart, and not just about saying, okay, we'll take care of these 3 and then stack up as many as you want and apply wherever you'd like.
Can I afford it? Would I like it? Would I be happy? Can I get accepted? Yeah. Those are the questions. And it's not bad, Ian, one more quick thing. It's not bad to love a school that will accept you. Like, it's not, you know what I mean? Like that, it's good to love a school that will accept you. That makes them better and you better. It's,
That's a great point. And I have to remind kids sometimes, like, the reason that we consider this no problem for you to get into is because you've kicked butt through high school. Like, you've had a great academic record. So this school looks at you and says, we want that kid. That's a good thing, right? We don't need to have this desire to reach for these schools. So, I love that idea. You're sort of taking down the idea of reach schools. You're really helping students to think more about what these schools are that they can predict, where they can be happy. Any other like little pearls of wisdom that you want to make sure that people have before we go to break?
That's hard. That's like when parents ask you, what haven't I asked you that I should? I don't know. Good luck. Pearls of wisdom. It's the beginning of September. Take a breath and just think, seniors next year, you'll be in college. Like, this has an end date. That's my best sort of advice. So as stressful as it gets, it's not a reflection on who you are as a human being, and it's going to be over and you're going to be a college student. This is the first step, not the last.
So your final answer on number of schools, 8 or 10 must be even, can't be odd.
That's my personal. I don't like odd numbers. People like 13, 7. What? Oh my God. That gives, no. So it's weird.
7's my favorite number. And I think probably the ideal number of colleges to apply to, but I draw a line with 10. Okay. And that's because I want to make sure that you know and want to attend every school you apply to, and because you need to balance out that work. So I hope you all didn't have to fast forward just to get to our numbers. 10 for me, 8 or 10 for Jen. But you got all of the rationale along the way. So Jen, that was great. Thanks a lot for coming on the show.
It's always a pleasure. Thank you.
All right, folks, when we come back, we are going to talk about paying those bills for college. Like Jen said, got to make sure you can afford it, right? So we'll ask Lori Peltier to join us for that segment. Don't go anywhere.